Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today I'm going to be diving into my rest of season running back rankings for 2021 fantasy football. We're jumping into week 6 here in just a day or two, and now it's time to look ahead as we're crossing the 1/3 marker of the season to what names are the top options at the position for the rest of the year. I'm going to be breaking down my RB1s and 2s for 12-team leagues, so my top 24 running backs at the position. And again, the players are the most valuable for lineups here on out this season. So we're not going to waste too much time before getting into today's video. Thank you guys for stopping by and checking out today's episode. Let's hit the intro and get straight in to our first player. Alrighty, we're going to be going in descending order for today's episode. So we're starting at 24 and making our way towards the number 1 overall fantasy running back for the rest of the season, as I've got them here for you again entering into week 6. We'll be putting out plenty more of these rest of season rankings throughout the coming weeks here and as we progress even deeper into this year. But Damien Harris is my current RB24 right now. Damien Harris is basically as vanilla as it gets in terms of fantasy football production, but he gives you on a week-to-week basis and in favorable matchups steady performances. He'll go out there, run behind that Patriots offensive line. They want to try and approach games by running the football and making efficient passing plays. So that means getting ahead of the sticks on first and second down. And when Damien Harris is healthy, ready to go out there, his offensive line has been banged up as of late, but usually when they're at full strength, they're a very strong unit. He can go out here, put together a healthy yardage total, and maybe even find the end zone to give you a little bit of upside here. But again, a very, very basic running back. Not too much flash and dash with Damien Harris, but he is at the very least somewhat dependable of a weekly lineup start. Josh Jacobs for the Las Vegas Raiders. A little bit less vanilla than Damien Harris, but still a pretty basic player. Not overly involved in the receiving game here. He has been a little bit better this season than he was in 2020, but at the end of the day, he's still a running back that's touchdown dependent to reach his ceiling. That pass catching volume isn't there to propel him to extra numbers and extra production. And this Raiders offense is something I have trending backwards now here with the loss of John Gruden and the foundational system that they have in Las Vegas. Now, obviously, he was removed from that situation for very justifiable reasons, but I don't think that can go without saying that this offense might feel a little bit of a blow here, moving from a coach who's been with the team for multiple seasons now to an interim head coaching role for an assistant coach who's been elevated to that spot. I think Josh Jacobs becomes a lower-end RB2 here and still can be depended on in standard leagues, especially more so than PPR, but still a guy that I'm not looking at as a player who can go out and win my weekly matchup for me. Javonte Williams. Now, this is a name that could potentially rise from this point to the rest of the season finale as we get down the stretch here. But as of right now, he hasn't quite hit that top-end breakout and that top-end ceiling that I've got projected for him here. Obviously, being one of the first running backs, he was, I believe, the 3rd back taken in the 2021 draft class. He's got some draft capital invested into him here, and I think that running behind this Denver Broncos offensive line and being the focal point of this offense is what's going to propel him there. But right now, we're still in the middle of a 50-50 split with Melvin Gordon. And while Javonte had twice as much yards of output from scrimmage as Melvin Gordon on the equal amount of touches in Week 5, still, he hasn't shown that he's going to pull away just yet in terms of the overall usage and volume he's getting here as of right now. So still a little bit hesitant to go out here and classify Javonte Williams as a weekly must start, but the upside is great. This is what that's based upon, and how he ends in the RB2 category and ranking here is because I see the long-term projection of his upside being very high. He just hasn't quite realized that true potential yet. Cordarrelle Patterson. Now, a lot of fantasy outlets out there are saying that Cordarrelle Patterson is a bad NFL player. His numbers aren't sustainable, and while I do agree with that statement, I do think that right now, while he's like the RB3 or he's right up there on the top of the mix, depending on your scoring format, that's going to regress here. The touchdown count is not going to stay that incredibly high as it was for the first month of his tenure as a viable fantasy player for the Falcons offense. I still think he brings a really unique dynamic to fantasy lineups. Now, depending on what app you're playing on, you're able to start Patterson as a wide receiver or running back, and that can be incredibly valuable to your team. For a player who's catching passes at the clip that Cordarrelle Patterson is and putting up the receiving yardage totals and splitting out wide and producing in that fashion, you're now dabbling in territory where you've got yourself something that really no other running back does here. And while, yes, he's not the most talented NFL player, and he is clearly a late breakout in terms of his NFL playing career, I mean, it's not very often we see a player into his early 30s breaking out and realizing his fantasy potential. Patterson still has lineup value and potential to be a productive and successful player with his role in his current offense in his current team. So Patterson's a player that I'm buying into as a lower end RB2. He's got really good upside. We'll see how that floor continues to look the rest of this season, but for right now, I'm liking Patterson. Chris Carson, I'm much lower on him right now than I have been in the past. Obviously, the injury plays into things here. Obviously, Russell Wilson's injury can't go without notice. That's going to impact the overall output and efficiency of this entire Seahawks team. You're now going to be even more dependent on the run game, and that run game being efficient and productive while being probably the focal point of opposing defenses, because it's probably the expectation that a dominant running the football coach in Pete Carroll, or I shouldn't say dominant running attack coach and offensive game plan, but a coach who prefers to play run first style football. Even with Russ, the Hawks were running a lot and at a very high clip this year in comparison to the last couple of seasons. Chris Carson is going to be expected to step up to the plate and produce the same numbers that he was previously, while now having more attention on him from the opposing defense. So whereas Russell Wilson could divert some attention away from the ground game and keep things opened up and keep defensive units honest and backed up, respecting their pass game, we'll see how much Geno Smith can maintain that level of respect for the vertical passing game and how much cushion he can create for Carson in the box here. And like I said, he's got somewhat of a chronic neck issue going on right now. My expectation is that he's going to be healthy and ready to go for week 6 here. That's the trend right now. It looks like he's going to be back in, and Alex Collins will be bumped back down to the bench. But there's a reliability factor here. I think the ceiling is now a little bit capped without Russell Wilson in that lineup. And there's a couple of things playing against Carson that, like I said, impact that ceiling and floor. So going forward this year, I'm a little bit lower on him than I was earlier on. Chase Edmonds. Now, Chase is coming off his lowest output and performance of the season in week 5, but the usage and the fashion in which he is utilized for this Arizona offense is something I really love to see. He's got a target floor of he's seeing about 4 passes come his way out of the backfield every single week, and he has yet to score a touchdown this year. So you're talking about a player who's giving me consistent and reliable production in 4 out of 5 games this year. He is technically the lead tailback over James Conner, who just comes in and barrels through defensive lines for touchdowns to cap off drives. He's not really doing anything efficient or unworldly. Chase Edmonds is the player that does the dirty work. He's the efficient back in this offense, and he's the guy that, again, has that incredibly valuable role of splitting out wide, catching passes, and doing damage out in space. So I think Chase has a really nice ceiling here. Again, I thought the floor after 4 weeks was great until that week 5 performance, so clearly there is some margin for error here, which keeps him a little bit lower down and still in that intermediate RB2 level category. But he's still a player I'm comfortable with and confident with going forward here. And in PPR leagues, I think he can be a fairly established RB2 for the rest of this season. Leonard Fournette, the last 2 weeks trending up in my rankings. 23 touches in week 4, 16 in week 5. Those are his last 2 games. He has pretty much looked like he is the guy in this Tampa Bay backfield since Ronald Jones has had his struggles, since he's kind of faded and taken a back seat to Leonard Fournette here. This is actually kind of the opposite of what I forecasted and projected for this football team for this season. But Leonard Fournette is starting to dabble in the receiving game. Now, Giovanni Bernard is still that James White-esque player, if you will, for this Tampa offense in terms of TB12 heading over from New England. But Leonard's still catching some passes out of the backfield. He's being used in that fashion sparingly, and he is the goal line player right now for this team. He's not going to see a super high volume of touchdowns, or maybe as high as he could, because Tom is throwing so many touchdown passes and capping drives off with scores of his own. But if there is a player in this offense who's going to cash in, it's most likely Leonard Fournette on the ground. And again, the volume has been trending upwards the last 2 weeks here. And he's a player who's looked really, really clean. He had a couple of blunders early on in the season, including that dropped pass that led to the first Trayvon Diggs interception of many already this season. But I think Lenny going forward here, it's a perfect spot at number 18. He's right there in the middle of the pack for fantasy running back twos. We're still not quite sure what to make of his long-term upside this year, but the floor is starting to look more and more reliable by the week. Kareem Hunt. This is a player I would have liked to actually had higher on the list today. He's currently the RB6 in half PPR scoring. He's been annoying. If there's one word I can use to describe Kareem Hunt to this point in the fantasy season, I'm sure Nick Chubb owners out there can understand this and see where I'm coming from. He has been so annoying. 6 touchdowns for Kareem Hunt here through the first 5 games. 6 total touchdowns, that is. He's stealing goal line carries. He's capping off drives. He's getting entire series at times, and he's the pass-catching back for this team. It's very, very evident that Cleveland and the Kevin Stefanski offense want to lead a ground-and-pound rushing attack, and Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are an awesome 1-2 punch, 1-2 combo, 1-2 duo, whatever you want to call them. But Kareem has come in here and been almost as, if not more productive, and it's certainly in a fantasy space, but in terms of just his actual raw usage, than Nick Chubb has been to this point in the season. His rushing yards are there. The passing involvement is there, obviously more so than Nick Chubb, who is more of a pure running back. And going forward, as long as the Browns can front run and stay in the lead late in games, they're going to continue to have 30-plus touches distributed between these two backs every single game. Hunt's dang talented. We've known this for a long time. He could be a starter for probably dang near every team in the NFL outside of, I don't even know what number to toss out there, but let's just say he might be a top 10 running back in terms of overall skill and talent. We saw how good he could be for fantasy with the Chiefs, and he's still putting up incredible numbers as the number 2 in his offense in Cleveland. So lots of respect to Kareem Hunt. Again, he's been a super annoying and pesky player, but someone going forward who is probably a weekly lineup start, even if you didn't draft him to be that for your team this year. Darrell Henderson at the RB16 spot. Just an efficient running back. In his 4 starts that he's got this year, he missed 1 to injury. He's got 3 touchdowns, or he's got a touchdown in 3 of those games, I should say, which is kind of nice because you've got an even distribution of points from that angle looking at things. And with this offense able to be so balanced, to run the football, to pass the football, and Darrell Henderson not really being overly elite at any particular skill, just being an overall well-rounded back and a solid player, it allows him to be pretty dang productive. And again, being in a good offense is just beneficial for fantasy value because you're going to be extending drives, moving plays down the field, getting opportunities to touch the football in the red zone. And we've seen Sony Michel kind of come in here every once in a while. He'll get his plays. He'll score a touchdown here and there. But Darrell Henderson, when he's healthy, is still overwhelmingly the top dog in this Rams backfield and someone you should feel pretty confident with as a weekly RB2 start. James Robinson, been skyrocketing up my rankings list ever since those first ugly performances of the season. The touchdowns, the usage, everything is trending up for J-Rob right now. It's awesome. It's reminiscent of last season, maybe even a little bit better. Say what you will. Urban Meyer tossed out the idiotic statement that his goal is to rush for 250 yards and pass for 250 yards every single game. That's probably not attainable. Even the Ravens couldn't do that. But in terms of the workload and the overall production we've seen from James Robinson since he's had those comments, it's been fantastic. So whatever you're doing, Urban, I didn't trust you to get J-Rob the ball early in the season. Keep feeding this man. He's a workhorse. He is the definition of like a steady Eddie player. He just falls forward, gets positive yardage, and gets into the end zone. The Jags don't score the football much, but chances are if they do, it's going to be J-Rob pretty frequently. So one of the best stories in the league, obviously an undrafted player last season, absolutely nothing to do with fantasy football, but just a cool name to watch, and especially for an 0-5 team right now, James Robinson is certainly a bright spot on a very, very dull roster. Saquon Barkley at number 14. Now, I could actually have Saquon lower if you'd like to argue from that stance. He's going to be out 2 to 4 weeks, and his ankle right now is the size of a golf ball. I mean, this guy can't catch a break. He was just starting to look as if he was shaking off the dust, getting confident in himself as a player, and really looking like he was going to start maximizing his potential ability as a player, especially coming off that hot game against the Saints and where he had the game-winning touchdown. And then that happens against the Cowboys. He gets injured. Saquon's got all the talent in the world. Does he have the best offensive situation in New York? Probably not. Is his offensive line the best? Absolutely not. He needs a break. He needs to get healthy here. I hope that he can maintain his confidence, come back and play with his explosive, dynamic ability, and be the player we all hoped he could be. Because I'm sure those of you in Dynasty Leagues, when you had the first pick in the draft in 2018, were salivating that you were going to get the next generational running back. And boy, has Saquon been a letdown and a disappointment to this point. So he's definitely got flashes, spurts of being an awesome talent. And again, that game against the Saints was phenomenal, even just this season, coming off that ACL injury. That's the type of player he can be. He just needs to get on the field and do that for us more. That's why I've got him outside of, obviously, that RB1 tier. And then just the fact that you're going to miss some games pushes him and drives him down this list a little bit more. Antonio Gibson. This is a name I'm watching very closely this week. Why? I'm very concerned about the receiving involvement. That's something I expected to be a staple of his fantasy usage this season. He's got 10 total catches on the year. Through 5 games, that's 2 catches a game. You're talking Josh Jacobs level territory. That is a letdown. Antonio Gibson now does have a 73-yard reception for a touchdown on one of those catches. Very unlikely and unusual that would happen, but it did. Nonetheless, though, that's helping inflate his numbers and look better than they currently are. If Gibson has a limited role in the receiving game here in Week 6 again against a Kansas City team that I think he's going to be needed to be available in a dynamic fashion for, I'm probably going to be selling Antonio Gibson because I think that the overall ceiling without a touchdown is a lot lower than we think it was. We were talking about Antonio Gibson being in the Christian McCaffrey role of this Washington football team offense. Obviously, having Coach Ron Rivera, a former Panthers head coach, coming over from Carolina to coach the football team, it seemed like that comparison might not be too far off, but it has been very, very far off. Again, that involvement in the receiving game just has not been there. Gibson needs to show us more from an overall dynamic usage for the rest of this season, because outside of touchdown production and explosive plays, something, and it's the receiving game, is clearly a missing element of the fantasy profile right now. DeAndre Swift. So the start of this RB1 tier here, he's a fringe RB1, just as Antonio Gibson just outside the bubble is. So is DeAndre Swift. He's been productive. He's scored some touchdowns and spurts here. Him and Jamal Williams have found ways to both be cohesive and productive running backs at the same time in the same offense for a bad football team. As unusual as that is, it has been the case so far this year. But what we see from DeAndre Swift is that when he's unable to catch the football because of the bad game scripts that are bounced the Lions' way, he tends to struggle a little bit more in those games when he's not being as involved as a pass catcher. He happened to not score a touchdown in one of his performances this year and not be too involved as a receiver. Only 6 fantasy points in that outing, and his next lowest output was 9. Other than that, in half PPR scoring, he's got 19 to 19.5 points in every game when he is able to see 5 to 6 targets come his way, haul in some of those catches, and obviously find the end zone. So one of the most dynamic running backs from that draft class, super talented, super capable of putting up great numbers. The Lions, as they become a better football team, hopefully that can help them stay in games late and run the football later on. But again, DeAndre Swift's greatest asset is his pass-catching ability, so whenever he can get utilized in that role is something that you want to obviously have on your lineups. Joe Mixon, one of the few remaining true workhorse running backs, and we're going to be getting into obviously a lot more names that are seeing a great volume and work share in their offense, but Joe Mixon is still over 20 touches a game, and he's doing most of that as a pure rusher, less of a receiving threat this year. Mixon is, he just gets the ball so much. He had 29 touches in week 1. That is an absurd marker to be at. The only thing that can hold him back right now is lack of touchdown production, which I don't think is an issue because Cincinnati can move the ball. in offensive line play, and it's been at least improved from last season. It's taken a step forward to the point where you're feeling a little bit better about that group now, with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Joe Burrow leading that passing attack. I think this team is now more capable of sustaining drives and moving the football down the field. That should help Mixon's touchdown production stay fairly steady the rest of the season. And when you're getting so many opportunities to touch the football as he gets healthy here and recovers from that minor ankle injury, which saw him or impacted him in the fact that he had a reduced touch count last week, he should trend back to those numbers and be a very steady, again, he's still in the fringe RB1 territory, but a productive player at the least. Najee Harris, another player who we talked about some RB2s that could rise up this list. Talk about Najee Harris as an RB1 that I could see trending upwards even further at some point this season on the rest of season rankings lists that are going to come out in the future here. Harris's workload has been incredible as well. He has a 14 reception game as a running back out of the backfield against the Cincinnati Bengals for the Steelers team. You talk about over 20 touches a game for Joe Mixon. Najee Harris here in his rookie season's got over 21 touches per game. He's over the 100-touch threshold for this season already, and like I said, we're just crossing, or will be crossing, the third way marker of the year here. So you're talking about a running back who might see 300 touches in his rookie season. Those are excellent numbers. Pittsburgh's offensive line looked improved last week. Najee had his most efficient day on the ground. He should have another great performance against Seattle here in Week 6. The arrow's trending up for Najee Harris. If you are an owner right now, it is a time to be excited. Jonathan Taylor, getting back on track here. This is what a workhorse running back in the National Football League looks like. Scoring touchdowns, getting high volume, making not necessarily super explosive runs. Now, he did score a 70-plus yard touchdown reception on a screen pass, but just the fact that on 1st and 10, he can bounce off tackle and rush for 13 yards. This Colts offensive line is starting to come together. They're starting to figure out some chemistry, even with some injuries up front. They're moving the sticks. They're getting defenders out of the way and creating holes for JT in this run game. He's one of the most explosive downhill runners in the National Football League. He's Nick Chubb-esque, except he's a little bit better of a receiving back. If this Colts offense was more effective, more efficient, I might have him higher on the list here, but Carson Wentz and the overall ineptitude of this team to be an elite offense at this point in time is what keeps JT a little bit lower, and obviously offensive line play as well. Although it is trending up, I want to see a bigger sample size before we get too ahead of ourselves here. Nick Chubb. So while he doesn't catch passes like Jonathan Taylor, now JT is no Alvin Kamara or Austin Ekeler level pass catcher because they've got Nyheim Hines who comes in to handle some of that work as well. Nick Chubb is getting virtually nothing in the receiving game. I believe he's got 10 receptions on the year right now, if my memory serves me correctly. Not a big part of his game, though. He does get very many explosive rushing attempts, and he is a player who is basically a lock based off of his touch load. He's got 20-plus carries in each of his last 3 games. He's a walking 80-plus yards rushing. He'll get you a fantasy floor of 8 to 10 points. That's 80 to 100 rushing yards. Again, he doesn't really catch passes, so not going to add too much in that phase of things. But the issue here is that if he's not scoring touchdowns and not catching passes, that's what you're getting as your point output in full PPR leagues. So that becomes a little bit more problematic in those scoring formats because he can leave you a little bit empty-handed when you're looking at the stat sheet and you say, well, he's got 85 rushing yards. It's only 8.5 fantasy points without those receptions or, again, those touchdowns. So over 160 rushing yards against the Chargers and a score last week. You're feeling great. You're feeling phenomenal. He is able to make up for the lack of receiving involvement because of those explosive carries of 20 or more yards. That's a very frequent and very common part of his game, something he's developed into a real strength here, and running behind one of the best offensive lines in pro football makes a big difference as well. Ezekiel Elliott, kind of involved right now in sort of a 1-2 punch with Tony Pollard, but obviously Zeke has pulled away and kind of quieted down the Tony Pollard fantasy hype at least a little bit right now. Dallas, they figured out the formula to success here. At least they've rediscovered it. When you run the football more than you pass it, Dak Prescott's a great leader, great NFL quarterback. Maybe not great, that might be a stretch, but he's a very, very good NFL quarterback. He's got great passing weapons. But when you keep this team balanced, they're going to come out here and do great things. They're going to be productive. This offensive line is looking more and more like that 2016 unit. It's not quite up to that level, but it's looking more and more like that unit that was blowing defensive linemen off the ball and pushing teams backward, opening up huge holes where Zeke isn't being touched for 3 or 4 yards before he even has contact. So you're talking about a very good running back, still a very powerful player, someone who's very capable of producing great fantasy numbers, getting that situation on top of the fact that a little bit of a reduced touch load might not actually be all that bad of a thing. You're going to have fresher legs for Zeke in this extended season. He'll have little nicks and knacks, and he's got some, I believe it's a back soreness right now. He'll be fine as long as he can stay out there, stay fresh. Zeke's going to be in it for the long haul and a top-end fantasy name down the stretch here. Dalvin Cook. Now, kind of like Saquon Barkley, I've got him a little bit lower because of injuries. We'll see. I mean, it's been a couple of weeks now since we've seen Dalvin Cook be the feature back for this Vikings offense, and to Alex Madison's credit, he's come in, filled in, and been a monster. It was 2 easier opposing rushing defenses, but still, can't go without mentioning that there. Cook should come back in, though, be his typical self. He's one of the most used running backs in the National Football League. When he's out there, he's the centerpiece in the core of this Vikings offense. It's as plain as simple as that. Over 25 touches per game last season, and he was continuing that trend this year prior to having that ankle sprain and missing some time here. So he missed a game, came back and kind of played half the contest, missed a big chunk of that game, then sat out again in Week 5. Week 6, we're hoping to have him back now, but still a player long-term I'm relying on this year. And if he proves he's back to 100%, back to putting up quality numbers, he'll move up respectively to his former, spot at that number 2 or 3 spot on my rankings list. Alvin Kamara. Now, not the same player he was last year, obviously. A different role in this offense post Drew Brees. He's not the dominant receiving threat that we've seen him be throughout his career to this point. His target numbers were actually quite disappointing up until last week. Finally gets back on the map with 8 targets from Jameis Winston in Week 5. That's a big improvement from his numbers to that point in the first month of the season. So I'm hoping and praying that Sean Payton values efficiency. I know he values efficiency, but he preaches it to his young quarterback, Jameis Winston, keeps him throwing the football to Alvin Kamara short, keeps him getting the ball in the hands of his best player and moving those chains, because if that happens, Alvin Kamara is another player we could see rise up this list because he's got the touchdown production, he's got the talent. I mean, he's been being used a ton in the actual rushing game, but the efficiency comes from his involvement as a pass catcher and his utilization in that fashion. That's where we're getting the bang for our buck in Alvin Kamara. At number 4, I've got Aaron Jones. Efficient in a good offense. Got all the tools you could ask for in a workhorse running back one for fantasy football. The one thing that's a little bit annoying here is A.J. Dillon has come in and snatched 2 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. Not something that is overly concerning to me. We saw Jamal Williams be highly involved in this offense in 2020. Even in 2019, he had his role, but Aaron Jones is clearly the heart and soul of this offense. In the passing game, the Packers are incredibly limited to Aaron Rodgers throwing the football to Davante Adams ad nauseum. They at least have a dynamic playmaker in Aaron Jones who can open things up through the running attack and also catch passes out of the backfield as well. His biggest game by far was the 4-touchdown performance against the Detroit Lions. He's got 1 touchdown separate outside of that contest, but that's a number I expect to continue to gradually increase throughout the rest of this season, and I think that this Packers team will have to become incredibly balanced, especially against good teams, because when you're passing the ball, everyone in the stadium knows it's going to number 17. So taper off that a little bit more. I think Aaron Jones, he's been seeing a very healthy touch count to this point in the season. He's got 18 or more touches in 4 of the 5 weeks this season. A running back I feel very confident in, and this is someone who could absolutely be hopped by Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook when they return back to full productivity, if that's the case here. Austin Ekeler, all offseason. What was my nickname for him? Mini McCaffrey. The dude has come out here and freaking produced like Christian McCaffrey. It's been awesome to see. He's got 7 total touchdowns. The little man's been getting it done on the goal line, catching passes. The little moon ball that Justin Herbert throws him on the wheel route is fantastic. I've watched it done to perfection. I mean, he just hangs it right out there, and Ekeler hauls in the catch. It's awesome. He showed us in 2018 when he was filling in for Melvin Gordon during his holdout how special a player he can be, how elusive and dynamic he is. And he's finally come out here and just blown the roof off this place. this is his team for the entire season. As long as you're healthy, Ekeler, you're going to go out there and ball out. A top 3 fantasy running back right now, especially in PPR leagues. No reason not to be incredibly high on Ekeler. Even for a player of his stature, he is seeing touchdown production, which is crucial and pivotal. And even without that touchdown production, maybe you're not getting these astronomical games out of him, but that pass-catching involvement is still giving you a ceiling on top of the rushing value he has on a week-to-week basis. One of the hottest offenses in the league right now, led by one of the best quarterbacks who is playing phenomenal football, doesn't turn it over all that much. Situationally, I love Austin Ekeler and the Chargers. Christian McCaffrey. Now, he's missed some time with that hamstring that he sustained. What was it, against the Texans? Frustrating, but I got to keep him up here at number 2. I still expect him to be the best running back in fantasy football almost every week when he's healthy. This guy manages to score absurd amounts of fantasy points, even if he doesn't find the end zone. His overall usage in the run game, combined with how many passes he catches on a per-game basis when he's out there, it's incredible. I mean, week 1, if you remember, against the Jets, I think it was, he had almost 200 yards from scrimmage. He had almost 100 yards rushing and 100 yards receiving, and that's just a casual day at the office for CMC. That's the numbers and the production we expect from him on a week-to-week basis. So someone I am supremely confident in here, as long as these injuries don't turn into a bit of a bug and just hamper him for the rest of the season like they did last year. Obviously only played 3 games. Fingers crossed here, because we're not really past that threshold yet. McCaffrey should be just fine, though, and continue to put up those top-end numbers. Derrick Henry, the number 1 fantasy running back for me right now. Who has done it better on a more consistent basis with fewer lapses in production than Derrick Henry the last 3 fantasy seasons or so? He has been the constant that just will not go away. This offseason, I talked Derrick Henry versus Alvin Kamara. What is going to be the breaking point here? And my thing was 5 straight years of Derrick Henry improving in every single major statistical category for an NFL running back. Rushing yards, rushing attempts, rushing touchdowns. Everything got better year over year. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, he ran for 2,000 yards last year. That has to taper off. There's no way he can do that in back-to-back seasons. He had 397 touches last year. I'm just like, there's no way this happens again. And here comes Derrick Henry, maybe even off to a hotter start. And with the extra game this year, he dang well might just pass that marker. 3 touchdowns last week. Dude is on fire, running all over teams. I mean, you can say the running back position is not one of value in the National Football League. It certainly is to us fantasy owners. But man, this dude is the core, the centerpiece, the most valuable player for this Titans team. What an incredible player we have on our hands here. Derrick Henry's a special talent. He's going to keep hammering out touchdowns, rarely gets injured, almost never misses time. A player that's going to be consistently a top 3 player on a week-to-week basis, productivity-wise, almost every week the rest of the season. Alrighty, that was a longer episode, but thank you all so much for sticking with me and checking out my rest of season running back rankings here as we approach week 6 fantasy football. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit that like button and click the subscribe button if you're new around here, and turn the bell on so you're never late for a video or miss a piece of content from the channel. We post tons of videos every week, so you got to make sure you take advantage of those and check out all of the various pieces of advice that we have for you on a week-to-week basis. So thank you guys so much for stopping by. I will see you all next time. Peace out.